Hi, welcome to Strategy, Leadership, and Impact with your host, Blake Repine. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the podcast. Glad you could join us. It's been pretty busy lately. Have the podcast going again, started the YouTube channel. That seems to be going quite well. Slowly seeing a bit of growth there, which is great. All the YouTube channels that I follow, they all say, be consistent, keep putting content out, it'll grow. Don't really worry about the algorithms too much because it'll put it in front of the right people that are part of your audience. And as it grows, they're able to identify that even more, which has been great. And so, just looking at the formats that we're doing and how we're doing everything and making sure we're putting out quality content so that we can help learn as we go from each other. Had a lot of great feedback and a lot of really good questions lately, and which is actually going to lead to some better content, but also I have some really good interviews lined up coming up over the next few months. Very excited about it. The interviews always seem to do quite well. And it's always great, of course, to have people on the podcast that really want to share their perspective and just see that, that genuine leadership perspective coming through as they share their own experiences, and we really get to know that other person that's there for the interview. And the interviews will be done audio and video as well, so which is great. The challenge with it, of course, is editing. I am not great at video editing, but I'm getting better, and I'm getting some direction from a mate of mine who's excellent at it, gave me some really great feedback, some really good pointers. So hopefully we see improvements there. It's just one of those other things too. Sometimes you got to be terrible to have a start. And then as you start and as you get better, you're going to get better at things as you learn, and it'll always look a bit better. This week's topic, again, came to me from a listener who actually asked, how do we know what our strengths and weaknesses are as a leader? We get performance reviews and things like that at work, and we get some feedback. But it's difficult to know sometimes, like, how good are we? Are we as good as we think we are? But also, where's our weaknesses as well? Sometimes we can identify those pretty readily as we reflect on things, but sometimes it might be a bit more difficult. And sometimes even our strengths are difficult to identify. Yes, some people, well, what are you really good at? And they actually can't tell you, well, I'm not sure. But you ask 10 people, what do you think I'm good at? And you get 10 different opinions. They all could be the same thing. And you look and go, well, there's some recurring themes here. Maybe that's what I'm good at. And there's two different thoughts. Do we continue to just focus on our strengths and build those, because then they overshadow your weaknesses, because you don't need to work to your weaknesses necessarily, or do we need to work on our weaknesses to build them up to where they are strengths? And that's something you really have to ask yourself in your own career. Is it important that you build those weaknesses, or build it a little bit, but then outsource it or delegate it for someone to do that is an expert whose strengths are in those areas? I've taken that approach where I will focus on my strengths, and where my weaknesses are, I'm going to get someone else whose strengths are in those areas, because we'll complement each other. So I actually have 8 different key things that you can use in order to look at how you're actually identifying your strengths and your weaknesses so that you can grow as a leader, which of course will lead to your professional success, organizational success, and the organizations you're leading, and things like that. So here we go. Number 1, self-reflection. And I talk about self-reflection quite a bit. So you need to analyze your past successes and failures. That's no doubt. You always need to look at them. So why did something succeed? Why did it go well? What is it that I've done, or the decisions that I made, or the team I brought together that made it be a success? And then failures, again, failures is a strong word, but are learning points. What can we learn from this, and how can we actually make it better for next time? So just really reflect on the scenarios where you've excelled or fallen short, and then what contributed to each one of those outcomes. Self-reflection too, you have to identify what are your core values. Consider really what drives your decision-making, those principles, and how those values shape your leadership style. Sometimes that's difficult because subconsciously we rely on the values that we hold close to us, and it could be difficult to bring those out. But they will. And look at your decisions and think, well, what are the ethics behind the decision I made? What are the values I put into that, and the principles? And you can almost develop your own leadership principles. I actually talk about that in both the books I've written and on a number of podcasts that I've done. Have your leadership principles. And you can steal someone else's principles if they really resonate with you and you feel that strongly about it. There's nothing saying that you have to be completely original. They have to be totally different from something that somebody else has done. They don't have to be. But develop your own leadership principles and stick to those principles and hold true to those principles, but also allow them to be pliable as you learn and grow so that they can change. But at the end of the day, your morals and your ethics behind those principles hopefully won't change. Number 2, you can gather feedback. Ask for feedback. Like I said before, ask 10 people. Solicit input from your peers at work, from team members, from mentors, from people that you've worked for previously. You can use anonymous surveys for honest responses, but sometimes people, they assume that you're going to know who it comes from anyway, so they may not be quite as honest. I have some friends who are honest almost to a fault, but it's quite refreshing. Whenever you ask them a question, you're going to get an honest answer. And it might not be the answer that you want to hear, but be prepared. You're going to get an answer, but you can take it that is the dead set, most honest answer that you're going to get. You can also use 360-degree feedback. So that's more of a formal tool of feedback to gather insights of all levels. So you're looking at people that report to you, your peers, the sides of you, and people from above you. Some of those can be pretty good. The bigger the sample, I think, the better the results potentially. But you just have to decide, are you in a position to get that 360 feedback, or do you want to go to that formal measure to actually do that? And number 3, assess key leadership competencies. So some key leadership competencies that I've put together for this, there's only 5 of them. You can evaluate yourself in these critical areas. So number 1 is communication. Are you clear, concise, and inspiring? Now, I don't know that all communications are going to be inspiring, but if that's your goal to be inspiring, are they inspiring? And clear and concise, what's the feedback you're getting back that tells you that it's clear and concise? How do you know it's clear and concise? Are people doing what you've said or asked them to do, or are they doing something different? Because that's a form of feedback. So you have to look at that. From your feedback, you can determine, is it clear and concise? Number 2, decision making. Do you make timely, well-considered decisions? That is one of the things that's going to elevate you above other people when you look at moving into leadership roles or higher level roles, is your ability to make decisions and make them in a timely manner, but well thought out decisions. And I'm not saying you need to dwell on a decision for 2 to 3 weeks or a month, but it's just the ability to make a decision and get started on a course of action. So how well do you do that? Number 3, emotional intelligence. I've talked a lot lately about emotional intelligence. Are you empathetic and able to manage emotions effectively? Used in the video I did a couple days ago. Ask yourself, why do I choose this emotion? And once you learn why you choose certain emotions to react to certain things, you can actually elicit that emotion when you need to in certain situations. But also being able to recognize emotions in others and what they're experiencing and understanding that. That's another part of emotional intelligence. But where does your emotional intelligence sit? And it's difficult to say, well, there's this range. But again, that's some of the feedback that you can get. But try to judge yourself. How well do you control your own emotions? Number 4, delegation. Do you empower others or micromanage? Big difference. So if you give people tasks to do, get out of their way. If you're getting in their way, you're probably micromanaging. People that work for you, they may not feel comfortable in giving you an honest answer if you ask them, am I empowering you or am I actually micromanaging you? So they might tell you what you want to hear. So that one might be a bit more difficult to just get that honest feedback for, but try to do the best you can. Adaptability. How well do you handle change and uncertainty? I've worked across multiple industries, and I can tell you right now, every one of them, someone has told me, well, this industry, we're a bit different. Nobody in this industry likes change. Well, no kidding. Humans in general are very process-oriented, very routine-oriented. They do not like change in general. Probably 75 to 80% of people don't like change. And that's a completely made up number. There's a real percentage out there, depending on which research project or research you read. But 75 to 80% of people will resist change in some form. Typically, you'll hear people say, well, 25% will be your quick people that will quickly uptake change or adapt to it. Your middle 50%, they're your fence riders. They could or couldn't, but sometimes they'll sit back and wait and see, is it going to work or not? Is it something that's worth my time and actually taking up? And then your 25%, your lower 25%, your bottom 25% of people that will just flat out resist change. And sometimes you got to determine, that's a whole other subject. Anyway, not going to go on that soapbox. But your own adaptability, how quickly are you to adapt change and adopt it? And when you look at change, it's not just changes in the workplace, like AI coming in and disrupting things, different processes, systems, but your own leadership ability too to adapt to different situations. And sometimes you'll have to adapt to different situations on a daily basis, depending on the context of whatever it is you're doing at that time. How well are you able to change gears and change that, I guess, that approach, that leadership approach, or your dynamics in order to meet the situation? So back on to the things to look at. So number 4 is use assessments. And this kind of goes back to 360-degree feedback, but there's personality and leadership assessments like Myers-Briggs. Do you know what your Myers-Briggs personality type indicator is? Your DISC profile. There's several others out there. There's an EQI that you can take, which measures your emotional intelligence, or at least gives you a scale you can do. There's the Gallup Strengths Finder that can reveal tendencies and natural strengths. But there's multiple different cognitive behavior assessments or these psychometric assessments that you can take in order to give you some sort of, you're an ISTJ, for example, for your Myers-Briggs or something like that. And you can actually do deeper research into each one of those or what the outcomes is in order to really understand yourself a bit better. And then there's the emotional intelligence test that I mentioned before, the EQI. I did that several years ago. So I actually got the chance to sit down with the organizational psychologist and go through that result that I got. I did far better than I thought I would, but there were some things that really identified that are at my core very much my personality and how I operate. And we identified that I've actually developed mechanisms to overcome those. And I found that really interesting. He said it's kind of like working out. Yes, I know I use a working out analogy. You can change how your body looks through working out, but you can't change who you are at your core. So that's what some of these things get to, is you at the core. And then there's other things like leadership surveys, validation tools like the leadership practices inventory that will identify specific traits that you have or leadership traits that you have. And then once you understand that, you can actually play to that strength of that trait. So number 5, observe patterns in your leadership. You can analyze your team performance. Are you fostering that high engagement and productivity? But how well are the people on your team performing? Are they getting work done or not? And that might not necessarily be how you're motivating or inspiring them. There could be a process issue in there that you need to address. But overall, how are they reacting to your own leadership? Are they lethargic or aloof? Or are they inspired and willing to come in and do the work and quite excited to do it? And then you can review recurring challenges too. So are there these consistent issues that arise under your leadership, such as miscommunication or lack of clarity or misconduct? So if you're constantly seeing these same things come up again and again, what is it you can do to overcome them? So that's probably a weakness for you, because again, that's a form of feedback. So you need to listen for these things. So what are you doing to address them? And what are those recurring challenges that keep coming up? What are the things you keep hearing? Those common recurring themes. Okay, number 6, engage a coach or a mentor. So there are a number of leadership coaching or coaches out there, and they can help you identify blind spots and create a development plan for that, because their perspective is coming in to coach you to help you get better. So they're there to help you identify those weaknesses or those blind spots and things like that to help you improve your leadership. A lot of leadership coaches really like to dig into what's their background, what have they been through, what have they done, where have they excelled in leadership, or was it someone who was a manager and got made redundant or laid off at their job, for my North American listeners, and just decided, well, I can't get a job right now, so I'm going to be a leadership coach. There's some really great leadership coaches out there, and then there's some too, they're a bit suspect. So do your due diligence if you're going to engage a leadership coach, and make sure you're getting someone who has a very strong background and history in coaching people. Okay, and another one is, of course, the mentorship. Mentor, they can share objective insights based on their experiences and observations, and it's really good. And a mentor doesn't have to be in a formal capacity either. There's a number of people that I've worked with and for previously who I consider a mentor. There's certain people that if I am having a challenge, I'll pick up the phone and ring them, run it past them. Am I being reasonable? What do you think not necessarily what do you think I should do, but this is what I'm thinking I'm going to do. I always go to them with solutions. Can you sanity check it for me? Does it make sense? And the people that know you really well, probably going to be open and honest with you. And those people that I consider mentors, they're open and honest with me, and we actually have those conversations. But the same thing too, if they were to pick up the phone and call me and with the same type challenge, I'm more than happy to sit and give them my time and talk to them. And because I know too, as we work through these things together, it's going to make me better as well because we're learning from both sides. So again, mentor doesn't have to be a formal relationship, but it can be incredibly valuable to your leadership journey. Number 7, create a development plan. This one, going back to my earlier comments, it really depends on what your strategy is. So you can prioritize those weaknesses, focusing on areas that impact your team and organization the most. If you have a weakness in an area that really matters, you do need to focus on it. If you have a weakness in an area, and it might not be related to leadership, so to speak, it could be related to some other technical function, like finance, for example. Let's say that if you're an HR executive or someone who's rising the ranks in HR, you might not be strong in finance. We'll find someone who is strong in finance. But you need to determine whether or not your weakness is important enough that you need to put the time and effort into it in order to improve it. And then leverage your strengths. So double down on what you do well and maximize your effectiveness. And this is where I like to focus on a lot too. I want to be the best I can be in my strength areas. Why? Because they're my natural strengths. They're things that probably come natural to me, or they're things that I have really developed over the years to be really good at. And they are what have made me successful. So I want to focus on those, and I want to keep being more and more successful. So, of course, I'm going to try to be as strong as I can at my strengths, and where I need to work on my weaknesses, I will. But where I don't have to work on my weaknesses, I'm going to outsource it or delegate it. And then select or set those actionable goals. So using the SMART goal philosophy, just create those specific, measurable steps to improve in weaker areas. And sometimes leadership qualities are very qualitative, very difficult to quantify what it is. So it's going to be difficult for you to say, these are the measurable steps, and how do I actually measure leadership improvement? You'll have to guess that. And I say guess, you'll have to guess that on your own, depending on what your challenges are, what areas you're trying to improve in. But let's go back to the communications one as an example. If you're constantly getting feedback from people, I don't know what you want me to do, or people aren't doing the right work because they don't know what you want them to do, it could be, well, over the next month, I want to reduce the number of people coming back to me saying they don't know what I want them to do to 0 from 10 now, if you have 10 people work for you. Just as an example. Again, it's going to vary case to case depending on what your weakness is, but really you're going to have to put a lot of thought in how to actually measure that improvement. And then number 8, continuously learn and adapt. So seek feedback regularly, and you should. I've talked about performance reviews at work. Those happen typically once a year. Do you need to wait a year to find out what you're doing well and what you're not? No, you should know at any given time. And you should be working on it at any given time. You shouldn't wait until that performance review comes around. Be proactive, take some initiative, and actually get out there and ask for the feedback regularly if you're not getting it already. And then evaluate your progress. Invest in your growth. Attend workshops, read leadership books, and not all books have to have a leadership slant. And I'll give you an example. I like to read a lot of biographies or books around things that have happened and people who have led through extraordinary things. One example of this is Ernest Shackleton. If you read about what he took his crew through in the Antarctic, it's nearly 2 years where they're stranded, and him and every one of his crew survived. It's an incredible journey that they went through, and just some amazing challenges that happened. And to think that none of them actually died is just incredible. It's almost a miracle. But read about him as a person, how he led that crew and the decisions he made. They weren't always the popular decisions, but he made some really good decisions. But you can learn a lot from his leadership in those situations. It's not just about books that are just solely focused on leadership. Look at events too and biographies as well. And network with other leaders. Build that network. Someone you can pick up the phone and call anytime you have a challenge or need some advice. The attending workshops, I actually like to annually attend at least a new course or seminar or something to learn something new, or to expand on something that I already know, if that makes sense, to keep growing. Because the moment I quit wanting to learn and grow is the moment that I just need to call quits in my professional career. And then adapt to changes. So your leadership needs to evolve. Keep revisiting your strengths and your weaknesses periodically and ask yourself, are you still learning? Are you adaptable? Are you able to change and mold yourself? In an earlier podcast, I mentioned the leadership toolbox. Are you constantly getting new tools to put in that toolbox that you can pull out whenever you need them in order to be successful? So hopefully all of these resonated with you, and hopefully out of one of these things, you've learned one little thing or taken one little thing away that can help you be successful. If you have, let me know. If you'd like to delve into any of them specifically a bit further, let me know that as well. Also, what are your leadership challenges you're having right now? Send me a message. Let's have a discussion about it. Let's delve into it and let's get it solved and let's become better leaders altogether. Thanks. I'll talk to you again soon.